Okay, I see everyone is flowing in. That is wonderful. We have a great sign up list for this event. A lot of people are excited to talk about this. The elephant in the room. This is the thing. I feel like so much has happened around AI so fast that this conversation and just really holding the space to talk about some of these kind of the darker side, if you will, of AI. I feel like that the timing is now. So allow me to get us officially kicked off. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kalia Garrido, and I head up marketing and events here at Great Data Minds, which is now a Hike2 company. Great Data Minds is a collective of passionate data activists, and we're on the mission to modernize the world of data. We do this in a couple ways. We have services around strategic planning, education, and the deployment of critical data projects, and this happens over at hike2.com. And then in addition to our data services, of course, a little commercial on Hike2 is that we are a fully functional, best-in-class innovation consultancy, and we specialize in digital transformation, strategy, design, and implementations. Now, when it comes over to our data and analytics community, content and conversation, as well as events, just like the one that we're here to see today, that all happens over at greatdataminds.com. A little bit of housekeeping as we get kicked off. This is a webinar, so of course your cameras and microphones are off, but man, do we want to hear from you. We know people have passionate opinions around these topics specifically, so we welcome you to submit your questions through the Q&A. If you use the chat, it's even better because then your fellow participants or attendees on the line can see what you write, and we've seen some really beautiful kind of cross dialogue happening as we go through our conversation. We will also reserve a little bit of time at the end of the session for a more formal Q&A. So if you'd like to hold off for that, you can do that as well. And so today, of course, we are hosting the next episode in our AI series. So allow me to do some introductions with our esteemed guests. So first off, we have Michelle Moore, and she is going to be our governance expert today and really every day. Little bio on Michelle. Michelle is a transformation specialist with extensive experience in design, planning, and execution of digital and operational transformation, operational management, data management, and governance for large multinational organizations. Ringing the bell in from the security camp is Stephen Smiley. Stephen is the consulting director at ScaleSec, and ScaleSec is a cloud consulting firm specializing in complex cloud initiatives that deliver secure, compliant, scalable, and friction-free solutions. Stephen is specifically focused on architecting secure and reliable systems with experience in GCP, AWS, cloud security, systems engineering, cloud computing, and also he is an AWS ambassador. We have Bill Franks with us. Again, Bill, thank you for joining us. Everybody, thank you for joining us. I'll let you all take the floor in a second, but Bill is here to speak from the position of ethics around AI. For those of you that know, we've had Bill on the show before many times. He is the director of the Center for Statistics and Analytical Research within the School of Data Science and Analytics at the Kennesaw State University. He's also the Chief Analytics Officer for the International Institute for Analytics, and he serves on the advisory board of many prestigious organizations. He is an established author of many books and a generally well-known, recognized thought leader in the data and analytics space. Last but not least is my partner in crime, Mr. Mike Lampa. He is our very own Chief Analytics Officer here at Great Data Minds /Hike2. Mike is a true transformation agent. He's been working with enterprises to modernize their analytics programs from the ground up. And he's got a boatload of experience, both as an executive analytics practitioner and a consultant and an employee in Global 100 enterprises. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Kalia. Bill, Michelle, Stephen, thank you for joining us today. How are you guys today?
Great.
Good.
Great. Super happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward for this dialogue. Yeah, it's actually, when we have four people talking, is it a quadrilogue? Anyway, Bill, I'd like to start with you. You know, I mean, there's a balancing act going on here, possibly. You know, we got the rapid AI advancement. And there's a need to have some ethical responsibility that I need to balance against it. Can you talk a little to that? I mean, as a prominent evangelist and leader on helping us all be aware of the need for ethical analytics. What
Yeah, I
is
think
this?
the big reason it's getting so much attention these days is, for many years, to the extent organizations were doing analytics more broadly, in the more traditional analytics, they were, let's say, a little bit behind the scenes. So I might go to a website and get an offer, and I would know that that website was using analytics, but I wasn't really directly interacting with the analytics per se. And there's ethics considerations around that, don't get me wrong, but I think what's really heightened it in recent times is that with artificial intelligence, particularly the generative AI tools that have come out recently, you have not just, let's say, quote, experts within a company who are deploying them in very specific ways under very specific, governance and security, which I think we'll talk about today. But you have just general people out there with no training whatsoever accessing highly sophisticated tools directly themselves. And so I think this is part of why ethics is getting such focus. It's touching more people directly these days, but also there's people making use of it that haven't had formal training or even necessarily given thought to the ethical ways to use that that tool or technology. And we have to think as an industry, how do we make sure that giving these people access is done in a way that is going to be productive and useful and be governed and secure.
Yeah, and from an ethics standpoint, that I'm not seeing regulations being passed yet, but I am seeing signals that there is some regulatory work happening around the ethics of analytics. Is that a fair statement?
So I think this is the classic case. This is why ethics is so important. The regulations and laws are always behind whatever's happening, because by definition, something has to be there and it has to become important or visible enough or have had enough problems that people say we need rules and regulations, and then it takes quarters, months to years to actually pass it. So as it relates to AI specifically, there are pretty detailed proposals all around the world. In the US here, even there's some blueprints. Very little of that is really official law or regulation yet, as opposed to guidelines or suggestions. I think we can anticipate many of it will become official regulation or law soon. I know in Europe they're working things through, here in the US. But this is, to me, is the crux of why ethics is so important, because there are many, many things possible today that I think reasonable folks would agree shouldn't be done ethically, but that aren't illegal either, simply because it hasn't been addressed. And so you don't want to just keep up with the laws if you're an organization or a user of tools like AI. What you want to be doing is keeping an eye on what is actually ethical. And a lot of times what's ethical will be a much higher bar to cross than what's legal when the laws are behind.
Interesting. Okay. And Michelle, from a governance perspective, are there regulatory, I mean, when I lean into generative AI kind of applications, what needs to be top of mind from a governance perspective, are you thinking?
Yeah, I think it's really an extension of existing governance practices. I think what AI does to governance is both broaden it and deepen it, right? So you still need the same frameworks in place, but you're going to have to apply it more broadly to the organization, because anybody can start to use AI, generate AI, use it for input. You need more controls around that. You also need to have more controls around the traceability, so that you know where the information has come from, how it was derived, so you can be careful about things like biases, et cetera, that are part of the ethics discussion. And then it also is deepening, right? Because you need to get it more broadly understood across the organization and through all the systems, because you could have inputs coming in from other sources, right, that you don't necessarily know. So monitoring inflow and outflow of data from the organization and how it's actually getting into core systems is going to be a key piece of making sure your governance program is inclusive of AI as a tool set, right? Or a
Mhm.
tool that users may use.
Yeah, yeah. So far, I've not heard either of you say, be careful or stay away from generative AI, but I think I'm starting to pick up a signal that lean into it, but be eyes wide open. Right?
Yeah, I think so. As long as you know how people are using it or intending to use it, when it comes to how it then ends up inside your organization, that's kind of the key thing, right? So you've got to create your own guardrails, very context dependent in what someone might put in place in terms of policies around ethics would be very different to what another organization might do, just because their context is different, their data usage is different, and maybe even their core values are different around what they think really matters, right? So I think it is a how are you using it question to then define really what your rules and policies around it are going to be. And then that will define the breadth and depth of your program.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And that's a fluctuating breadth and depth that I suspect, as I keep seeing all these different kinds of use cases generate. I mean, even myself, I had it write code for me the other day, and it was pretty darn accurate. Yeah, because I want to build demonstration data sets. And it was like, this is pretty cool. But I gave it, of course, it's Python. I don't know what to do with Python, so I gave it to somebody that knew what to do with it. But the breadth and the depth message that you sent out really resonates with me, because I don't think we've experienced all the potential of this technology yet, right?
Yeah.
Stephen, from a security perspective, I don't know about all of you guys, but GenAI came to my attention, I think it was in February of this year. And it came out of nowhere for me. Next thing I knew, I had billed offers around it, consulting offers, and I didn't even know what the heck it is. Did it also come out of nowhere from the security industry experts and frameworks, Stephen?
Well, I would say no, right? So many of us have been following this for a long time, but we have had just a recent explosion in their capability and just the number of people using it and applying it. And so that introduces all sorts of risks, right? Because that means that many of those people were not thinking about it before and thinking about its implications. So there's just been a number of new incidents of risk, right, that we need to consider, right? And many of those are familiar risks, I would say, right? So things like access control to your data that's being put into a model, right? We've been thinking about data access control for a long time, but now it's just proliferating into so many more places, right? And many of these risks are still emerging, I would say. For example, there's been a lot of talk lately about extracting training data out of models, right? Initially, it didn't appear as though that training data would be extracted very effectively out of models, right? So we were thinking, okay, it's building a representation of this model, but it's going to be difficult to get it back out, right? And now people are doing attacks like repeating a word indefinitely, and then at some point the model spits out just raw training data that might have included personally identifiable information or any other like sensitive information. And so that is a risk that people just weren't thinking about too much even a couple weeks ago or months ago, right? And so now organizations are thinking, well, if I fine tune a model, if I put my proprietary data into this, will someone be able to pull it back out, right? And that's one of the big use cases that we're seeing. So retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, seems to be a very promising application, right? I can take my company's data, put that into this model, and then allow my employees to converse with something that has access to all of our data, right? And that, wow, the promise of that is powerful, right? But if that means that they can also extract all of this data, it completely blows out of the water all of the ways that we thought about access control before, right? Because it has all of them, and how do I distinguish the users? So we have familiar risks and emerging risks, and we're still figuring
you
that
probably
out.
have to consider in there also the hallucination effect, right? Because if you're basing it off of a set of data, now people start using it and augmenting the output, and then it's going back into systems. Now you need some sort of assurance that what they're ending up putting in the system is still valid and accurate, right?
Precisely, and that's why the RAG application is so interesting, because it actually kind of sits at some of the current weaknesses of LLMs, and I think that it's possible that we'll overcome these things, but that's why it's we're being hesitant to jump right into using these, especially if we're putting sensitive data into things, right? Like anything that goes in, we need to be prepared for it to come back out, and we need to consider that.
Yeah. So I'm gonna open it up to all three of you. I mean, is Gen AI really creating new risks? I mean, is this stuff that we've never, really kind of thought about before from a compliance and an ethics and a security perspective?
Well, I'll throw out, I think one thing that is a new risk is that, most of our historical data, it is what it is. It might have errors and so forth, but those errors were inherent in that the data was miscaptured or it got transferred wrong. But those errors are also, easily identifiable if you have processes to find those errors. I think the new risk in a way is especially with the language model. So when people generate an image, I think they understand that image is fake from start to end and was probabilistically generated. I think the risk with LLMs in particular is that people are assuming, because it sounds really good most times, that it is a specifically factual based narrative that's been repeated back to them, when in fact it's a probabilistically generated answer to a question that can have fundamental errors in it. And so I think that's where there's a new risk here, is that we're getting answers. I predict with a classic model, I know that the data inputs went in and I'm going to get a projected response and I can investigate what happened. But a lot of this text that comes out of the LLMs, it's on you to validate it, and it can sound really good, but still be incorrect. And I don't think most people appreciate that and have accounted for that in how they're using it yet.
Yeah.
Well,
go ahead, please. No.
Oh, I was going to say, like, and one of the other elements is that even if they're not necessarily new risks, it has the potential to just automate the same risks at a much higher rate, right? So, there's been many analogies here, right? But it's like traffic cameras, for example, right? It's like, do we want traffic cameras at every intersection or at every foot or whatever, right? Does that change the feeling that we have about being observed, right? It's like, well, we were okay being observed a little bit, but suddenly when observed everywhere, it feels different. It's just a lot more incidents, right? And we also had a similar debate in the military intelligence community, where we asked, do cyber attacks represent a new type of threat to intelligence or warfare, right? And it's like, well, one of the differences is that they can be automated and done at such an incredible rate that whereas an individual might have been able to do that, now they can automate millions or billions of cases, right? And so I feel like there's analogies there where we can learn from these other thought experiments as we go into this kind of new uncharted waters.
Yeah, I would say that the newness of the risk is, if I capture some of what you just said and add one thing to it, is scale, which is what you're talking about. There's just now a lot more of the same thing. And it can come from many different places, where before you had more control over the places that the risk was coming from. Then there's the question of veracity, which Bill was speaking about. You got to question more things actually now, because you can't assume that it is actual fact. It looks like fact, but is it fact? And then there's the third one I would say is the application and usage risk. how is the output being used and how was the output actually generated? So things around, are we building in inherent biases, and we're using then that data to make decisions that now are actually sending us off down a path we didn't really intend because of the bias that's built into what has been generated for us, right? So I think it's those three things I would say are the newer level of risk, which is the scale, the application, and the veracity of what AI can produce.
Yeah, yeah. And as the three of you are talking, a question that pops into my head is, or it's almost a visual that's coming in my head, is like this three bubble Venn diagram. People, as they're leaning in to the security considerations, the regulatory compliance, corporate policy compliance considerations, wearing an ethics hat, all that, feels like it all needs to be brought together into a cohesive kind of framework. Can you guys push back on me? I mean, or should we be focusing, I got to get the security access controls nailed down. I got to make sure that ethical use is happening in its own pillar, and I got governance kind of overseeing the insurance of security and ethics. Or
yeah, I think they're completely connected. I don't think you can make decisions in one of those circles without involving the other two circles. I just don't think that's possible.
Yeah.
So, I would take an approach that presumes you should be accounting for those three things together when you're making a decision in any one of them. They're just inherent in the beast. And then on top of that, that's sort of your foundational layer. The actual then ongoing things like data analysis, usage in the business, yada, yada, that requires a whole different culture, right? That's built on this foundation that is those three combined areas, so that everyone, that's the depth and breadth thing, right? Everyone understands the risks that are in play and why the policies and procedures are important and why access controls are required. It isn't, just for fun, it's for real reasons, and people need to understand what those reasons are.
And we have seen some standards organizations start to put out frameworks like this, right? So for example, NIST recently released a risk management framework specifically for AI. But I would say that I would expect that to change a lot over the next 3 years, right? Like it's definitely the version 1. And so I would expect that to change. But I agree that there's kind of a consensus that we need to bring it all together.
Yeah, and I differentiate, Mike. I think strategically, and as you develop your strategy, your policies and so forth, these three are so interconnected that they can't be ignored. Now, that doesn't mean when you're down to some tactical implementation steps, it's very likely the security team could be working on a few little things over here and the governance team a few little things over there. But what they're working on, it cannot be tasked without having had the broader view before you send them off to go do those things. So I think, there obviously you'll have people that focus on one or more of the, just one of those areas, typically not all of them, but as an organization, you need to be doing the planning at that macro level.
Yeah. And throughout the course of the dialogue so far, we mentioned, we brought up the concept around establishing guardrails. I'm asking myself, do we expect everybody to just be good corporate citizens and look at the ethics policy that's been written and governance policy and the guardrails, the evolving guardrails that are coming along around the proper use of generative AIs or large language model applications? Do we just put these things out and expect people to be good corporate citizens, as I mentioned earlier, or is there a way to codify it, monitor and enforce this stuff?
So I think, it's going to be both, right? And that's similar to what we've had with so many things, right? So we can centralize creation of policies, guardrails, we can establish processes that try to be proactive with finding not just risks, but also opportunities, and trying to get a hold of those before they kind of go off their own path. So I think that makes a lot of sense from a central standpoint. But I still think that at the end of the day, we do need to expect that people, people are going to be the ones doing those things, right? And so that's always going to be the weak link. And so that's going to take some, training and education, but probably also, empowering them to do what they're trying to do in a safer way, right? So giving them a clear path. If we just say, hey, don't, right? People are going to find a way around it, right? We've seen that with security and all sorts of things for a long time. So giving them a clear path towards achieving those goals, but in a way that aligns with our organizational values, that's probably going to be the best path to success.
Yeah, I think it's a real transformation of mindset, right? It is about a new data culture and understanding that it's everyone's responsibility. I think, unfortunately, you're going to have people that get around or try to get around the rules. But I think that's where you need to have in place monitoring and auditing processes so you can go and double check that people are generally following the rules. You're not going to catch every scenario, right? But I think you do have to have some level of monitoring and auditing in place to ensure that things are being read, even if it's just reading the policies and making sure people have gone and checked the box that they've read the policy so that you can hold it up if they ignore the policy later, right? Some simple things like that. But I think the training and education piece is a huge part of this.
And I'll throw out too, Mike, this ties back to the whole thing, how laws haven't caught up. Well, corporate policies won't have caught up either. So I think it gets back to whatever policies you have, whatever legal constraints you have, it's still necessary to make sure people understand they also individually have to be putting their own common sense and their own, ethical filter on top of things they may be being asked to do or they may see happen. That may not be covered by those policies or those laws that are problematic. Maybe some new capability popped up as a result of the intersection of this new data we received and this new software we implemented, and someone goes and starts to use those together. That doesn't, just because it's not prohibited explicitly, doesn't mean that should be done without some thought. So I think that personal responsibility of taking ownership of the ethics of everything that you see yourself and your team doing is critical. Otherwise, you'll inadvertently, in most cases, I don't think most people purposely, when there's been ethical breaches in the past, it's not normally someone trying to be really horrible. It's something that people hadn't fully thought through and didn't think about the end result of that properly. And then it ended up happening and they probably felt just as bad as everyone else. And so it's really just good for everybody, for folks to do that on their own as well.
Bill, I have a question for you. Generally, I see that lag that you're describing as natural and appropriate, right? Rather than creating restrictions that are just cumbersome for hypothetical reasons, right? Is there an argument to be made that AI is unique in that regard, that like AI presents the ability to do things so quickly that you wouldn't be able to respond within that lag period?
That's an interesting question because I think it's back almost to that scale question. I don't think there's anything unique about AI, let's say as an algorithm or in terms of the capabilities that it has. I think what could be unique, and it's not just AI, it's our systems in general today have such speed and such scale that what seems like a minor decision can end up being repeated, 20 million times by lunch. And what would have been a minor problem 10 years ago is a major problem today because of that scale aspect. And so I think in the age of AI, scale has picked up and AI has been scaled faster than other things. I don't think it's necessarily uniquely tied to AI as much as it is, as AI has come out, it's present alongside the scale from the get-go, whereas other times it hasn't been. And so I think this scale is really the bigger issue across all of this. Things happen so fast and so massively that if we're wrong, we're going to be wrong to a much worse extent before we're able to catch it.
I think that the other nuance on that is the unstructured nature of what AI can produce as one of the outputs, right? And that is so qualitative and not quantitative. That is another area that's hard to measure, monitor, et cetera, because it requires someone to go read, understand, and decipher the output, right? You can't have another machine do it because you're just going to repeat the same thing again. So there's something around the unstructured nature combined with the scale as well that creates a little bit different scenario to deal with, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah, because one of the conversations I've been having with my customers lately is, they'll say, well, we're not really using this. So we're not super concerned about putting these things in place yet, right? And when that happens, I'll call you. And my reply has been, well, it might be happening and you're not aware of it.
How do you know?
Right?
Mhm.
And if it does start happening, how will you know? And what could be the impact to you, your business, that your organization, in the time that it takes for you to detect that and then put controls in place, right? And if the answer to that is significant, then you probably want to get ahead of it, right? If the answer is, oh well, it doesn't really matter to my business, then okay, it might not make sense for you. But that's a conversation that we've been having.
And it reminds me, in the old days of when I did software development, working on an application that had a very targeted use, created, tested, released, 99% of the customers that use that application were using exactly as intended. And then we had this 1% that found a way to use it that was not at all what it was designed for. And all of a sudden they're having problems executing part of their business because they had basically hijacked a part of the application to do something else, right? It was creating another problem downstream in the application. So users are interesting, right? They know their context and how they want to use something. They will do it regardless of the application, really, sometimes, right? So that, I think that's the unknown risk. We don't know how clever people are going to be or creative they're going to be.
It's funny, Michelle, I was thinking that exact same thing, when you mentioned, so we don't have to worry about this. We blocked ChatGPT and Bard. Okay, well, you know how many other little models there are out there, or how many websites that you interface with that then pass it to those apps? To your point, people are using it. And it reminds me of the days probably 10, 15 years ago when we were first trying to get people to do analytics within, say, an enterprise data warehouse environment, within the platforms. And I'd have some IT organizations telling me, well, we don't want people to be doing these things or enable them to do these things. And I would always say, you're misunderstanding. They are doing it right now.
Yeah,
your analytics organization is pulling all your data off, putting it on some servers and doing whatever the heck they want with it. It is happening today. And whatever risks you're exposed to, you're completely unaware of. Wouldn't you at least rather be able to see what they're doing and facilitate it as safely as possible? So I think, this is one of these, if you put your head in the sand and think that people aren't using AI or that you can lock it all down, it's not going to work. And B, wouldn't you rather be in a spot to see it and react quickly rather than, see yourself in the newspaper and now you're beat up doubly because someone did something bad in the newspaper and your organization had done nothing to stop it or even know about it.
Yeah, it's kind of like, as the three of you just shared that last round there, is like, let's lean in, let's embrace it. It's got incredible potential, but we don't know how to effectively use it necessarily just yet. We have to learn, we have to evolve the guardrails, and so let's lean in, let's embrace it, but let's give them an environment where it can't cause that the potential for big risk is minimized, because we're leaning in, we're embracing, and we're learning together, but the tribe has to be all involved here. Right? And you mentioned earlier, all three of you kind of confirmed, there's a 3-bubble Venn diagram here. So it needs to be triangulated as an approach. I'm also picking up that needs to be holistic, but holistic, we don't know what holistic is today. So how do we nurture the ability to safely experiment with this technology?
I mean, I can provide my perspective, which is just, I think we need to be proactive about it. I think we need to keep the benefits in mind and not just be, I mean, like, this is similar to security. For a long time was seen as the department of no, right? Just saying no, and then people went around you. And so security has gotten better for organizations that have said, well, we will make a way for you to do this, and it makes your job easier, faster, better, right? So there's lots of practices that we've learned there, and I think we can apply them here as well, right? So if we can identify proactively, you've got a use case oh, this has potential business value, right? We're going to do that with a secure partner, right? We're going to use a model from, for example, so I'm an AWS ambassador. AWS just recently has put out a new Bedrock service where they're taking great strides to make sure that data that goes in there doesn't go anywhere else, right? For example. So you say, well, we found your use case and we're going to work with our trusted partner on doing this effectively, where we know there's strong security there, rather than you go find your own provider, right? That we haven't vetted. We maybe will pair you with our, experts on ethics or so forth that apply to your situation and help you refine that use case in a way that empowers you, right? So the safety and the acceleration go hand in hand, rather than just, from a far distance saying no or read this policy, and do it in alignment with that policy. That's just not going to work.
Yeah, and I think that the organizations need to facilitate sort of the innovation, right? The idea sharing of, hey, I think we could use it for this, so that people aren't just off trying it under their desk to see what happens. They're actually sharing the idea that they have, and you need really the mechanisms for them to be able to do that sharing, which is where the data culture piece comes in, right? If you have a culture where people are encouraged to come up with ideas around how to use data, period, which includes AI, then you can actually get the right eyes on the idea to help facilitate the idea, rather than shut the idea or block the idea in the first place, because we know they'll go off and try and do their own thing. So I think that's part of that data culture conversation about, it's not a bad thing, but we need to be aware of the risks associated with it. We want to help you with your ideas, right? So that we can put the right controls around it.
Yep. And we need to be future thing. You mentioned earlier, Stephen, proactive. We've got to get proactive. My sense is we also have to, it's a great opportunity to be more future thinking, right? Because this technology enables that. And we have to figure out a way to promote the proper utilization of the technology, so that the risks could be much higher. So we have to protect the organization.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that AI has helped us do is distinguish between work that provides value and work that doesn't, right? It has the potential to get rid of a lot of that, not very valuable busy work. And if, sometimes people are worried about, oh, AI is going to take my job. Well, if it takes your job completely, then your job may not have been providing that much value, right? Yeah. It was automation of things that, are not super unique or special, right? And so if once you pull off all of that other stuff, if there's not a whole lot of value add, then you've discovered something. If it is, however, that means that you get to focus on that value added work and use it to your advantage, as long as you do it safely, right, and securely, and all of that. And so I think that it provides exciting value. We can think about it as future looking and not be afraid of it.
Great. Awesome.
Yeah, on that, I always say, especially when I hear people, because my background is data science and analytics, and whenever I hear anybody worried about it within our field, I always just put out the question of, all right, in your job, how often are you sitting around with nothing to do? And are you actually addressing all of the problems you've been asked to address, either individually or as a team? And the answer is always no. Most teams have this backlog that's huge. And so at the end of the day, even if AI automated, 50% of my job, I can then do double the use cases. I'm still only a third of the way through the total list anyway. Now I'm adding a whole lot more value. I've probably gotten myself out of some grunt work. I'm solving more problems. This could be a win all the way around. You know, my job's more interesting. I'm getting more mental stimulation. The company is getting more output, but I'm not losing my job because we have so much to do. And to your point, if I have a job where there's so little to do that automating part of it puts me at risk, I really need to examine what value am I in fact adding if I'm dependent on doing a few very repeatable and automatable things by hand to stay employed.
Yeah.
Well, we have a great opportunity ahead of us these next few years. You know, I've always been excited in the data and analytics space, but when this baby showed up, I was like, holy cow, holy cow. Yeah. And I know it must have been in the making for several years, if not decades, but the manifestation and the realization of the potential just amazes me. And I've been in this industry since '96. So very exciting times, a little bit anxious, you know, anxiety generating, you know, but it's like a positive excitement, anxiety, I guess.
Yeah. I was doing some data analytics recently, and I was just having a lot more fun doing it because I was able to use some AI tools to help me generate the syntax that I needed to like make the charts and, you know, analysis that I was looking for. So I was spending more time understanding and exploring my data and less time trying to fight, you know, this syntax of queries, right? And so that made it more fun. That meant that I had a faster feedback loop of exploring the data. And I don't know, that's nice, right? Like that was a really good use case. And I look forward to being able to do that a lot more.
Yeah.
I would say just an overarching thing on this is, I think it's obvious in the conversation, it's a transformative technology, right? So it isn't like just something you plug into existing and continue down the road. It has the potential to transform your organization in many ways. So I think that's the other way it needs to be considered, is the paradigm shift that might be required to come along with it. Because if it does automate certain work activities, this does have implications to people, right? And some people are going to rebel against that, and some people are going to go with it. So you have to think about, how do you facilitate that journey so that you get to where you want to go in that transformation? So, you know, and that is on all layers of technology, of governance, of security, of the data culture around how you treat the data ethically, et cetera, right? It's not just a tool and we're going to play with it on the side. It has big, wide implications, I would say.
And you know, I feel like that has the potential to democratize access to some of these things, right? Whereas people may have been gatekept before by needing to know a bunch of, you know, a specific handshake to get into something. If AI helps you do that, and you know, a lot of people that may not have been able to break into data analytics or security or something like that, now will be able to. So that's exciting as well.
Yeah.
I think too, I've got on my list to write a blog about this soon, is being really honest about what's actually happening. So I've heard, let's take the call center space. Okay. I've heard a couple of companies talk about how, well, we're not going to actually eliminate anyone's job because we have huge turnover, like, you know, 50% a year or something. And what we'll do, we just won't replace someone when they leave, but they're not going to lose their job. And so on the surface, you'd say, okay, great. So no one's losing their job due to AI. The thing is, most of the churn with call centers is people maybe moving from call center A to call center B to get better pay or whatever. The point is, when I leave job one, that job is now gone. No one else will get it. So yes, it's true, I didn't get a job, but a call center job disappeared. And as the industry all does the same thing, there's not the places for those people to go. And so I think, you know, that's one of those arguments I've heard. I'm like, yeah, I don't know that's really fair. No person will lose their current job. That's true. But jobs that people hold are going away and they won't be refilled. That is a job loss in that sense that we have to account for when we talk about the impact of what we're doing. And so I'm not judging the rightness or wrongness of removing those jobs and automating them. I'm simply saying that we have to recognize and acknowledge that they are going away. And just because I didn't lay you off to have it go away doesn't mean that the job's is now no longer available.
Interesting. Yep. It'll be interesting to see how the federal statistics on jobless rates account for this.
Hmm.
Interesting. So, great new technology. It raises the bar around security and governance and ethics and transformation. These are not new things, right? And companies that maybe are a little bit less mature around the security access controls and governance and ethics oversight, maybe Gen AI is that triggering mechanism for them to level up their maturity. And
Sure.
that's a very good outcome, I think.
Yeah.
Sure.
You guys are
Yeah.
amazing. I love the brain power on this call.
Here, here.
Kaylee, I don't know, did we get any particular questions from the
We
audience?
do have a question. Yeah, Palak has written into the Q&A and asks, how does the government help make sure that the ethical requirements for AI are being met?
Who would like to take that one?
Well, I guess I'll start looping back to the beginning. They're catching up, they're lagging behind, they're trying to figure out where the controls need to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
As usual, it seems Europe is probably a little ahead of the US on that, because we take a more laissez-faire attitude to letting business get on with innovation and that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I think I haven't delved into it yet, but I know that there have been some new changes recommended by the Biden administration around this. As Stephen just alluded to, NIST has some guidelines on this. So I think it'll evolve over time. Everybody's learning it sort of in real time, right? Learning what to do with it, how it's going to be used. People don't even know how it's going to be used. It's such a free-form capability. So I think it's a matter of time to see really to what degree the government comes in to put controls in place or rules and regulations. I don't know, Bill, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I guess this gets back kind of to your point, back to the future as well. I think if we depend solely on government to do this, it's always going to be behind and it's never going to be effective. So not that the government can't get involved, but I think we, let's say us as citizens, take your corporate hat off. When you see an organization that's doing something with data, if you think that's wrong, or if enough people think that's wrong, they can, these days it's real easy to start up, hey, did you hear what company XYZ is doing? This just seems wrong. And soon enough, you can have the pressure on them and they'll end up adjusting and so forth. So this gets back to it's everyone's kind of responsibility. I think over time, the government will slowly catch up to what was needed 2 years ago, but it's never going to be able to be on top of everything. And that's why we have to, the companies, the individuals, and then us as citizens monitoring what people are doing. We've got to take that control back and just say, I'm okay with you using my data, or I'm not okay with you using my data this way. And then making sure that when violations occur or perceived violations, that, people raise that concern.
Yeah.
And actually, just about a month ago, the President Biden did issue an executive order on safe, secure, trustworthy AI, requiring, for example, the Secretary of the Treasury to issue best practices for financial institutions, right? So, and a number of things like that. So I think that they are doing their best to push, figure out what those best practices are. And push those out into the public so that people can start using them. And I think that, over time, we're going to start to see some strong themes that the rest of us will be able to integrate. And so I don't think we're that far behind on this. Yeah.
And I hope it doesn't, like in the past, a lot of the regulations that have been passed are because of some legacy event that took place. There was a hole in the system and it got taken advantage of. I really hope that isn't the approach we take here, that we get much more proactive. And I love the concept you all brought out is we all have a part in this. If you're seeing something that's a little funky, raise your voice, make your voice heard.
And I don't so I don't disagree with what you said, Steve, but I'll just put the nuance that in the end, that's still back to, we have to be voluntary, because in the US, at least, executive orders are suggestions basically. And when the Treasury puts out those guidelines of best practices, that's not a law or an enforceable thing. It's an official position of what's best practice, which you would hope it's better having that than not having that. And people would tend to follow it versus not follow it. But it's actually not an enforcement mechanism with teeth. And I think that's what people feel, I think the initial question was really getting at, how do we make sure that we're enforcing and it has some teeth to guarantee it? Even a lot of things happening today still have a pretty heavy dose of strong suggestions / voluntary, do the right thing, as opposed to those teeth. And I think it'll always back to it. It's just going to be that way for a while, because the newest stuff, it'll take time before teeth can be put in place.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, great point. All three of you, phenomenal job. Thank you so much. I learned a bunch. I got new brain wrinkles.
If we have time for just a couple more questions, we do see some coming in on the Q&A. And if we don't have time to address them all, then we can certainly send information back out as a follow-up. But we've got two more in the pipe here. First is from Alessandro. It says, how can small organizations keep up with AI developments? Does this mean hiring computer scientists to perform this role?
So this is one of the things that we at ScaleSec do, for example, is we try to be your expert. And if you want to establish a relationship with us, we can be your expert, and you can, ask us questions, and we can try to help you achieve your goals proactively, both and securely. So that would be one of my ways to do it. Is that's a great use of a consulting partner, right? To establish that relationship, early.
As an advisor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. And there's also, as always, tons of information out there, right? Lots of stuff on YouTube, lots of different groups you could join that are on this. So there's a bit of self-education. I think that's a piece of this. It is evolving daily, really, on capability and how it's being applied and used. So I think it's a combination of those two things for small organizations, because you can't necessarily afford to hire a data scientist type person, nor would they necessarily have 8 hours a day worth of stuff to do, right? So that does lead you down the, let's do a retainer type thing or a one-off thing with a consulting company that is doing this every day, right? Because they're dealing with multiple customers, and will have a lot more insight into some of the use cases that might apply to you.
Yeah, and I'll say, I think this is where the technology and the acceleration and scale of things, I can't recall the exact numbers, but I saw a study, it's several years old now, it's probably even more extreme, where, if you wanted to do a technology startup even 20 years ago, you needed at least X million dollars in seed funding before you could literally even get your core stuff in place to begin to do an offer. And now it's down, thousands. So with the cloud-based offerings, work for hire offerings, you can get a level of sophistication very cheaply and without a whole lot of investment compared to even just a few years ago. And again, have it centrally accessible. No one has to actually come over and get onto my network physically and log onto my machine. I give them access to my cloud, and they could be, you could give me access to your machines. I could go code you something right now today from where I'm sitting. And that's just a fundamental shift. So I think you have to get creative about what you think about when you say hiring a computer scientist or data scientist. Getting access to some of their skills, yes, that doesn't necessarily today mean you've got to hire them and they have to be local and they have to be using, your equipment specifically.
Yep.
That's precisely one of the reasons I love cloud, right? Like you can get 10 seconds of a computer scientist, right? You don't need a full-time one. Yep.
Right. Okay, last question here is from Palak, and it says, do the economic goals of the tech community affect the policies of the government?
It's a good
The classic tension.
That's a big one.
Who knows who's in there lobbying and, doing their thing? I'm sure it does, right? It always has, to some degree, had an impact on policy. So it wouldn't surprise me. What that is, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, we are a capitalist society, right?
On that note.
I mean, let's solve regulatory capture real quick.
Yeah.
This is a fantastic discussion, everybody. Thank you so much for sharing your brain trust with us today. Great engagement, great topic of conversation. It's stuff that everybody's thinking about. And I think it's important that we as a community are holding the space to like really address some of these things. So Michelle and Stephen, Bill, and of course, Mike, thank you so much for holding the space and having this conversation today. We got the question in the chat about recording it, and it's being recorded. We will post it out on YouTube. So you can certainly follow us there, and let's continue this conversation. It's certainly not going away.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful
Thank you,
afternoon.
everybody.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thanks.
Kelly.
Thank you. We appreciate you. Thanks.
Bye.